a reluctant invitation in the summer of 1985. Few could have predicted that one single performance would not only redefine a band's legacy, but also become a cultural touchstone remembered for decades. Queen, already veterans of the rock world with more than a decade of hits behind them, almost didn't show up when Bob Geldof and Midge, Your First, began piecing together Live Aid. Their ambitious plan was nothing short of outrageous. 2 massive concerts held simultaneously at Wembley Stadium in London and John F. Kennedy Stadium in Philadelphia, beamed via satellite to over 1 billion people worldwide. The goal was as noble as it was unprecedented: raise money to combat the devastating Ethiopian famine. For Brian May, Roger Taylor, John Deacon, and Freddie Mercury, the idea initially sounded disastrous. 50 bands on one stage. That's a recipe for chaos, May later recalled. Queen weren't touring at the time. They were resting, regrouping, and thinking about the next chapter. The notion of dragging themselves onto a massive stage for just a handful of minutes didn't seem appealing. In fact, as May told Radio Times years later, Freddie himself voiced the doubts most sharply. "I don't have a good feeling about this." Mercury wasn't technically the leader. Of Queen, they prided themselves on being a democratic band. But when Freddie planted his foot down, it usually took a miracle to budge him so. At first, Queen said no. The relentless Bob Geldof was nothing if not persistent. Hot off the success of Do They Know It's Christmas, the charity single he had spearheaded, Geldof had the bit between his teeth. He envisioned Live Aid as something historic, a concert that would unite nations and show the world the power of music to effect real change. And he knew Queen's absence would be glaring, so he called. And kept calling. May remembered holding the receiver as Geldof launched into one of his trademark tirades, practically begging and bullying them at the same time. Roger Taylor, the drummer with a sharp instinct for spectacle, was the first in the band to relent. "The band's got to get the party on," he argued. "If we wake up the day after Live Aid and we weren't there, we're going to regret it." Taylor's words sank in. Slowly, the tide began to turn. May mulled it over, weighing his skepticism against the gnawing sense that this could be bigger than any one band. Then, in a conversation with Freddie, Brian blurted out, "Fuck it. Let's do it." That was all Mercury needed. Once he flipped the switch, there was no turning back. Freddie leaped at the chance with the ferocity of a lion. He became unstoppable, May said. Once he said yes, he took the lead. A band with something to prove its worth, remembering where Queen were in 1985. They weren't washed up. Exactly, but their dominance of the late 70s had cooled. Punk had raged through Britain. New wave had shifted the sound of pop, and in America, Queen's fortunes had dimmed after their controversial 1982 single Body Language and the MTV ban of its Risk video. The press had started to sneer, calling them dinosaurs of an earlier era. And yet, Queen still had the hits, more than enough of them. Bohemian Rhapsody, Somebody to Love, We Will Rock You. We Are the Champions, another one bites the dust. Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Any band would have killed for just one of these anthems, and Queen had a stack. What they lacked was a unifying moment to remind the world that they were not just relevant, but essential. Live Aid, though they couldn't see it at first, was that moment. Preparing for battle with Geldof's strict rule of 17 minutes. No improvising. Queen faced a unique challenge. How do you distill over a decade of chart toppers into a quarter of an hour? How do you grab the attention of not only 72,000 people at Wembley, but also millions, glued to their televisions in kitchens, bars, and living rooms across the globe? Taylor pushed for the obvious bookends. Open with Bohemian Rhapsody and close with We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. In between, they packed the set list with as much firepower as possible. Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, and Crazy Little Thing Called Love. They rehearsed hard. They stripped away the indulgences. No long guitar solos, no wandering jams, no theatrics beyond the pure performance. The songs would have to hit like hammer blows, one after another, with barely a pause in between. Freddie, meanwhile, prepared himself mentally. He knew, perhaps more than any of them, that Live Aid wasn't just a gig. It was a stage unlike any other. A global platform that demanded command. July 13, 1985. Wembley Stadium. The day was bright, hot, and humming with anticipation. Wembley Stadium was packed to the rafters, more than 72,000 bodies buzzing in expectation. The lineup had already delivered massive names: Status Quo, Sting, U2, David Bowie, Elton John. Yet when Queen's slot approached, there was a tangible electricity in the air. The crew wheeled Freddie's piano onto the stage. May slung his red special guitar over his shoulder. Deacon adjusted his bass. Taylor twirled his sticks, and then Freddie Mercury strode out. White tank top, tight faded jeans, armband glittering in the sun. Microphone stand in hand, his trademark half stand. Cut short years earlier, he sat at the piano. The opening notes of Bohemian Rhapsody rang out. Wembley roared, commanding the world from the first line, "Mama just killed a man." Freddie had the audience in his grasp. His voice, rich and soaring, cut through the stadium's vastness as though he were singing to each individual person by the time they segued into radio. The crowd was clapping in perfect unison, tens of thousands of hands rising and falling to that iconic beat. The sight of a stadium moving as one, led by Mercury's gestures, was nothing short of mesmerizing. Hammer to Fall brought the rock punch, May's guitar snarling while Mercury prowled the stage. Then came Crazy Little Thing Called Love, where Freddie played the showman, strutting, swiveling, and teasing the audience like a seasoned vaudevillian. But the most indelible moment came in the call and response section. Freddie, standing tall, called out, "Ayo." The crowd answered, a tidal wave of voices. He tried again, higher, lower, longer. Each time, Wembley answered. It was as though he were conducting the entire world. That "Ayo" would later be remembered as the very heartbeat of Live Aid. Finally, "We Will Rock You" thundered in. The stadium stomped and clapped in unison, the sound reverberating like an earthquake. They closed with "We Are the Champions," Freddie raising his fist skyward as 72,000 people sang every word. Time had slipped away. They'd gone over their allotted 17 minutes, closer to 21, but no one cared. Not Geldof, not the organizers, not the millions watching. Queen had just delivered what many still call the greatest live performance in rock history, the aftershock backstage. The band knew they had nailed it. But it wasn't until later that the scale of their impact became clear in homes across Britain. People who had written off Queen found themselves glued to their televisions. In America, where Queen's popularity had waned, their performance reignited interest. Radio stations began spinning their hits again. Record sales surged. A younger generation, some of whom barely knew the band, became instant fans. Bob Geldof himself admitted it. Queen stole the show. David Bowie, who had performed earlier that day, called their set the greatest live gig ever. Elton John, never one to mince words, told them, "You bastards. You've just stolen it from everyone." Freddie's finest hour for Freddie Mercury, Live Aid, was a crowning moment. His charisma, his command, his sheer ability to connect with an audience on a global scale, it was all distilled into those 21 minutes. What made it so powerful was not just his voice. Though it was flawless that day, it was the totality of his presence. The strut, the glance, the raised eyebrow, the wink, the outstretched hand. He turned Wembley into his living room and made the world feel like his invited guests. And all this came at a time when, privately, Mercury was beginning to face the early stages of illness. Though AIDS would not be confirmed for a few more years, Freddie's health was already fragile. That makes his Live Aid performance not only a triumph, but also a poignant reminder of his indomitable spirit. The legacy of Live Aid Live. Aid raised over $125 million for famine relief, a staggering figure for its time. But beyond the money, it proved that music could be more than entertainment. It could unite, inspire, and change the world. For Queen, Live Aid was transformative. Their career skyrocketed again. Tours sold out. New albums found eager audiences, and their reputation tarnished slightly by a difficult early 80s, was restored with thunderous force. Most importantly, Queen's Live Aid set cemented their place in history. It wasn't just another gig. It was the gig, a masterclass in performance, timing, and emotional connection. Even today, nearly 40 years later, clips of Freddie's AO circulate endlessly online. Younger fans, many born long after that July day, still marvel at the sheer electricity of it. Musicians study it, critics hail it, and fans cherish it. Epilogue. The day the world belonged to Queen Win. Brian May looked back on Live Aid decades later. He summed it up simply, "We had something to prove, and we proved it." For Roger Taylor, it was the obvious, we stole the show. And for Freddie Mercury, though he never explicitly said it, Live Aid was the ultimate vindication. The boy from Zanzibar who dreamed of stardom had become not just a star, not just a legend, but the very embodiment of rock and roll at its finest. On July 13, 1985, Queen didn't just play Wembley Stadium. They conquered it. And in doing so, they reminded the world of the magic that happens when four musicians, at the height of their powers, seize their moment. That day, for 21 unforgettable minutes, the world truly did belong to Queen.